Imagine this. It's the 1500s and you're part of an expedition from England to what is now the Canadian Arctic. After reaching your destination, you and 4 crewmates become stranded ashore, and despite the best efforts of the expedition's leader, you are left behind. This actually happened to 5 crewmen from Martin Frobisher's first expedition in 1576. It would take 300 years for their fates to finally be uncovered. In the 1500s, English merchants saw the enormous potential in trading with the Orient. The greatest obstacle to such trade was the long and dangerous sea voyage, which required sailing around the southern tip of Africa and east through the Indian Ocean. At the time, it was theorized that a shortcut could be found by crossing the Atlantic Ocean and then sailing west through the Arctic. This theoretical trading route, called the Northwest Passage, would allow British merchant ships to enter the Pacific Ocean months sooner than the standard route. In June of 1576, Martin Frobisher departed England on an expedition to search for a Northwest Passage. His fleet consisted of a flagship named the Gabriel and a second ship named the Michael, plus an unnamed large boat called a pinnace. Frobisher sailed west across the Atlantic Ocean. A severe storm caused the loss of the pinnace and forced the Michael to turn back. Frobisher and his flagship eventually reached what appeared to be a strait heading to the northwest. In reality, the strait was a deep bay on the southeastern coast of what is now called Baffin Island. The expedition soon met the local Inuit, who were surprised and intrigued to see these strange men and their ship. The sailors and the Inuit immediately began to trade with each other, with the sailors exchanging metal for valuable seal skins. In order to help learn about the area, Frobisher managed to convince an Inuit man to stay on board the ship and work as a guide. After a few days of teaching the explorers about the area, 5 crewmen were assigned to bring the guide back to shore. Frobisher ordered the men to land at a point that was well within sight and then return immediately to the ship. It was here that things began to go wrong. The boat party took the man ashore as instructed, but instead of returning directly to the ship, they rowed further away and appeared to be making for shore when they passed out of sight. The reason for this decision is not clear, but the 5 crewmen may have wanted to trade with the Inuit for more of the valuable seal skins and furs. This was the last time Frobisher or anyone from England would see the 5 crewmen. After a day or two of waiting for the men to return, Frobisher assumed that they must have been taken prisoner by the Inuit. Sending out search parties to retrieve the men was not possible because they had taken the ship's only boat. Instead, Frobisher sailed along the coast, firing the ship's small cannon and blowing trumpets in hopes that his missing crewmen might be able to make an escape or at least reveal their location, but these efforts proved fruitless. So he decided to take hostages of his own by luring the Inuit out to his ship with the promise of gifts and then grabbing one or more of them. Frobisher intended to use any captives he could get as bargaining chips to exchange for the 5 crewmen. He succeeded in capturing one unfortunate Inuit man, but this did nothing to help gain the return of the 5 missing crewmen. With no boats and a reduced crew, Frobisher decided to sail back to England, leaving the men to an unknown fate. Unfortunately, the Inuit man taken as a hostage soon became ill and died not long after arriving in England. The fates of Frobisher's 5 castaways would remain a mystery for 3 centuries until another explorer on a very different mission discovered what happened to them. In 1861, Charles Francis Hall was on his first expedition to the Arctic. Hall was a former newspaper publisher from Cleveland, Ohio, who dedicated his life to searching for survivors of the ill-fated 1845 Franklin expedition. The Franklin expedition is its own long and complicated story that involves the loss of 2 ships and 129 men. To this day, the reasons for the total loss of the expedition are still unclear. Hall was convinced that he would find survivors of the Franklin expedition living with the Inuit and that God had called him to retrieve these survivors. Despite this delusional thinking, Hall was still a good researcher and would go on to learn many important details surrounding the expedition's demise. It was during the search for Franklin survivors that Hall inadvertently discovered the fate of Frobisher's 5 castaways. Hall was exploring the Baffin Island area when he became interested in visiting nearby locations associated with Frobisher's 3 expeditions. As part of this research, Hall interviewed an Inuit woman and was astonished by what she told him. Despite 3 centuries passing, the woman was able to accurately describe each of Frobisher's 3 visits to the area. The details she gave closely corresponded to accounts of Frobisher's expeditions written in the 1500s. Hall was impressed that the Inuit were able to maintain an accurate description of events for 300 years. Something that seems impossible to a person not familiar with the practice of passing down oral traditions from one generation to the next. It was here that Hall learned the fate of Frobisher's missing crewmen. The woman told Hall how the Inuit had captured 5 men, though the reason for their capture is unknown. Nonetheless, these men were well cared for and lived in the Inuit community for at least one winter. More intriguing, the men were said to have built a boat equipped with a sail and set off for home. They were never seen again and most likely perished at sea during their attempt to sail back to England. Since the details given by the Inuit about Frobisher's 3 expeditions closely match the written accounts from that time, it is reasonable to assume the testimony about the 5 men left behind is also accurate. Finally, after 300 years, there was an explanation for the fate of the 5 crewmen. To the untrained eye, Baffin Island and the whole Arctic is an uninhabitable wasteland. Frobisher's men would have learned Inuit hunting and fishing techniques and been given fur clothing to survive temperatures of -20 to 40 degrees Celsius. The 5 crewmen became the first Europeans to winter over in this part of the world and probably the first to learn the local language, customs and methods of survival. There would have been 2 options for sailing back to England. Frobisher's men could have tried to modify the boat they took from the ship, or if this was not possible, they could have built an entirely new boat using Inuit construction methods. The Inuit are known for building single-person boats called kayaks that are used for hunting, but they also built larger boats called umiaks. These were used as transport vessels for moving people, equipment and supplies. It is possible that the Inuit helped the 5 men build one of these larger boats, which could have been equipped with a small sail. The Inuit likely helped in any construction and modifications, since no timber and nails would have been available for standard European boat building. The exact time, location and events of the 5 castaways' demise are likely to remain a mystery. Heading east out of the Arctic, the men would have likely encountered ferocious and unpredictable weather with high winds and gigantic waves that could easily swamp a small boat. Given human nature, the men chose to undertake an extremely dangerous ocean crossing just for the chance to see their homes and loved ones again. A decision we can easily understand centuries later. Today, we are often told to distrust stories passed on by word of mouth and are told instead to rely heavily on written accounts. However, there are some cultures such as the Inuit that can accurately pass on oral testimony from one generation to the next. In 2014, Parks Canada relocated one of Sir John Franklin's ships by basing their search on Inuit testimony. The Inuit told Charles Hall and other searchers that one of the 2 ships had been found over 100 miles south of its last known location and that it had sunk soon after being discovered. This ship turned out to be Franklin's flagship HMS Erebus, and its rediscovery will help researchers solve another Arctic mystery.